Super. Okay, so I will start then and just give a short introduction of who I am. So my name is Annina, and I've been an English teacher for 7 years, so teaching English as a foreign language. And I recently graduated for my master's in education for TESOL in December from the University of Glasgow, from the School of Education. So I spent 4 years teaching in Reunion Island, which is basically where I got inspired to do a master's and to research the topic that I'm going to talk about today. So after 4 years in Reunion, I returned to Glasgow to do my master's, and I'm still here working in the Glasgow School of English. Yeah, and that's where I am now. So I'm here to talk about my research, and the title of my dissertation, as you can see on the screen, is "To what extent did the exclusion of Creole from the Reunionese High School Curriculum in the 90s impact students' identity?" So firstly, I'm just gonna let you know what the focus of my study was. So I focused on the theme of language planning and policy, also on the concept of linguistic imperialism and its consequences. I explored the relationship between language and identity, and I explored the attitudes towards languages and language learning. So the attitudes towards speaking a language as a native language, but also towards learning new languages in high school. So I want to tell you why I decided to do this. As I said, I lived and worked in Reunion Island for 4 years, and it just really heavily inspired me. And if you don't know where Reunion is, here it is this little dot down here. It's next to Madagascar and Mauritius, which are probably more well-known islands, and it's in the Indian Ocean. So yes, it's a volcanic island. It's known for having an active volcano, one of the most active volcanoes in the world. Don't worry, it's not a dangerous one. I mean, obviously all volcanoes are dangerous, but this one is not one that will it's not explosive. It kind of just comes out nice and slowly, and you can actually hike up to the volcano and see the volcano erupting, and it's amazing. And it's also a beautiful tropical island. So this island was a former French colony, and it turned into a French department in the 1940s. And when Reunion Island was first discovered, there was no inhabitants. So the French came across, and then they brought slaves from Mozambique, Madagascar, and Asia. When slavery was abolished on Reunion Island, workers came from all over the world, India, Asia, Africa, and they started to work and populate the island. So these people came and they kind of took over the work that the slaves did. They worked kind of in agriculture and trading. But this process was called engagism, where they came over from other countries, worked, but for very low pay. And then these populations started to mix, and they created a really diverse population, which brought a lot of different cultures and languages together. So I went to this island with the British Council as a language assistant. So I didn't really know anything about the island at all. I just really wanted to live somewhere tropical that wasn't Scotland at the time. But I was completely amazed and loved the island when I arrived. And so when I first came, I believed it was a monolingual French society, but I was really quickly introduced to the Creole language and became intrigued to learn about its roots. So it's a really powerful language that gels the people together. It's like a part of everyday life. In my opinion, it's a really delightful, expressive language. It's very figurative language. And there is a plethora of music and poetry that exists in Reunionese Creole, which are very important to the people, to the culture, and it's a very important part of the history. So I will talk a little bit more about music later on because I used a text from a song in my methodology. But the music reflects the melting pot of culture that exists in Reunion. So Reunion Island is, as I said, a French overseas department. And the dominant language, French, was then imposed on the people, imposed on the island. So, as I said, I was really inspired by Reunion Island and its diversity. And when I was there, I started to think about language use. As I said, I was teaching, I worked in school, high school, and a university there. And I was wondering to myself, why do the teachers never speak Creole? Why is Creole never in the classroom if so many people speak Creole in the street, in their daily life? And I was thinking, this kind of feels like French is a privileged language here. So when I started my master's, I managed to get a better idea of what was going on. I came across some interesting terms such as linguistic imperialism, linguistic assimilation, and I realized that my preconception that Reunion Island was going to be a monolingual French island could have been linked to language planning and policy that was imposed by France. So that's basically the background of my study. So I'm gonna now talk about the purpose. Why did I want to carry out this research? So let's have a look. And basically, I wanted to understand the lived experience of those forced to be educated in a language that was not their mother tongue. So when I started to explore this topic, I realized there was a problem. So in the 90s, the Creole language and culture was excluded and ignored in the high school curriculum, even though 90% of the population's mother tongue was Creole. At the moment, it's still a very high figure. It's around 80%. Although it has like dipped a little bit since the 90s due to immigration, but the rate of people who speak Creole as a native tongue is still very high. So French was imposed as a dominant language in the 90s, and it still is imposed as a dominant language. And according to UNESCO, their study in 2016, imposing a dominant language through school can lead to social and cultural inequality. So this could be, for example, marginalization of those who speak Creole, or unequal opportunities for work and education for those who don't speak that language, the dominant language. And currently 30%, there's a 30% rate of unemployment in Reunion Island. And I think partly this can be down to the fact that Creole is a native tongue for a lot of people still. So I wanted to raise awareness about the importance of an inclusive approach to students' linguistic and cultural identities. I believe that this could have benefit on a personal level, for example, for my participants, for them to actually have their voice heard. Research has shown that students' voices are often not taken into consideration when planning educational policy. So on an individual level, I thought that would help the participants. But then on a wider level, I felt like this could influence teaching practices. For example, encourage teachers to be more inclusive when in terms of language use in the classroom. And maybe potentially on a societal level for people, policy planners, to take this into consideration as well. So that was my purpose. Let's have a look at my research questions. So I had 4 research questions, and here they are. So one was, do Reunionese people who were educated in the 90s feel that exclusion of the Creole language impacted their educational experience and life after education? Number 2, do Reunionese people who were educated in the 90s feel that excluding Creole from the curriculum impacted their Reunionese identity? Number 3, what is the general attitude towards the Creole language in Reunion Island? And number 4, what are the attitudes towards learning English in Reunion Island? So all of these questions can be tied back to the themes which I showed you at the very start.
Annina?
Hello? Yeah? Yes?
Nadia?
Sorry, could you just repeat question 2 to 4? You had a bit of...
Oh, it like the connection went?
Yeah.
Okay, so research question 2, do Reunionese people who were educated in the 90s feel that excluding Creole from the curriculum impacted their Reunionese identity? And 3, what is the general attitude towards the Creole language in Reunion Island? So those were my research questions. Then obviously, I went on to answer those questions in my study. I'm going to explain to you my literature reviews and what I reviewed in the literature in order to help me. So I actually did 2 literature reviews. This is my first one that I did, and I reviewed the literature surrounding language planning and policy in France and Reunion Island specifically, educational policy in Reunion Island, Creole language, and the Reunionese identity. So this first literature review defined language planning and policy. So language planning and policy is a deliberate plan to influence the function, structure, or acquisition of languages or language variety within a speech community. So it refers to political attempts to change the status of a language. And language policies are implemented by different countries to promote one official language, but this can often be at the expense of other languages. So we've seen in Reunion Island, Creole becoming marginalized, whilst French being promoted as the dominant, the privileged language. So yes, it talked about language planning and policy, and then it focused on the impact of a monolingual educational policy in France and Reunion Island. And then the Creole and the identity was discussed in this part of the literature review in order to get a better understanding of what it means to be Reunionese, and whether literature that had already been done had found that monolingual policy had affected Reunionese identity. Yes, so also, as you see, I talked a little bit about Creole in the literature review. So basically, Creole was developed in Reunion due to colonialism, and the lexical characteristics of Reunionese Creole are based on French. Creole languages, they emerge over a few generations in a multilingual society where there is no common first language. So the Creole is the language that ended up unifying people so they could understand each other better, basically. And then this is my second review, and I talked about, well, I researched linguistic imperialism, and then specifically linguistic imperialism in Reunion Island, linguistic imperialism in Senegal versus Reunion, because Senegal was also a former colony of France, and I wanted to draw parallels between how the language was imposed in Senegal versus Reunion. And then I talked about English as a global language, because English can also be seen as a language of imperialism. So I wanted to draw parallels between French and English, and then the attitudes towards learning English. So linguistic imperialism is relevant to my research because it's an ideology that affects attitudes and beliefs towards language learning. It can be defined as the transfer of a dominant language to other people. So it's considered to be a sign of power, this transfer of dominant language to speakers of another language. It's basically enforcing power over them. So it could be military power, economic power. And also, it's not just the language that is transferred, but also culture and ideologies are normally transferred with this language. So, for example, if French was transferred onto the Creole speakers, the Western way of thinking and Western cultural practices are transferred along with that language. Yes, so that was basically my 2 literature reviews. Oops, no, hang on, I just have a couple more things to say about that. So I had my research questions. I think I have somehow not put them in. So I'm just gonna have to tell you my research, how my literature review relates to my research questions. So basically, my research question 3 aimed to find out the attitudes towards the Creole language, and linguistic imperialism in the context of Reunion Island was discussed alongside linguistic imperialism in Senegal to draw comparisons. Sorry, I just realized I said what I said before. I'm going to move on to the methodology. So my methodology was to explore the lived experiences of participants who attended high school in the 90s. And I used qualitative research design using thematic analysis of a song and semi-structured interviews. So basically, the text that I chose was a song written in 1996 by Oussa Nusava, and it was called Oussa Mile. This song describes the social and cultural situation for Creole people in 1996, and it highlights language and public discourse in the 90s. I thought this was relevant because research suggests that music reflects the socio-cultural configuration of society at any given point of time. So it can actually give us a snapshot into what was going on at that point in time. And this song was really interesting for me. So I really, really love this song. I love this band as well. They're really popular in Reunion Island, or they were, but their music is still popular. So I'm going to just play you a little bit of the song so you can get an idea of what the Creole language sounds like, and also some island vibes. I have translated the whole song from Creole into English, so if anyone wants to see that, just let me know and I can send you a copy of the translation. So I'm just gonna play a little bit for you.
Si la terre, ça nous est né, n'y pourra pas habiter. Si la terre, ça nous est né, n'y pourra pas habiter. Des droits y pensent mariage, des droits y pensent l'amour, un petit joli paysage, un petit mamselle pose à toujours. Des droits y pensent l'avenir, un pays rêve futur, un bouc civil installé là pour apprécier la nature.
So there you go, a little excerpt of this song, and I totally love this song, and I hope that you guys do as well. So that is the text that I chose to analyze, and I analyzed this alongside interviews. So I did 5 semi-structured interviews. I really wanted to do 10, but I only had a month to collect all my data, and it was just really limited and difficult to coordinate 10 people for 1 hour long interviews. Overseas, like people living in Reunion, there's a big time difference as well. So I ended up doing 5, but it was fine. It still gave me loads of data. I used the semi-structured interview, semi-structured in-depth interviews to collect the data. As a new kind of researcher, I hadn't done interviews before. I would have liked to do unstructured to just let the participant develop everything that they wanted to say or more organically. But as a new researcher, I was like, semi-structured makes me feel a bit more comfortable and confident. So I chose to make these interviews multilingual. So if the interviewer, the participant, wanted to do it in Creole or in French or in English, they could do whatever they wanted. As I'm able to speak and understand all 3 languages, I feel like this may have given me an advantage to like make the participant more comfortable. So the target sample was people who were educated in Reunion and high school in the 90s. And the participants are required to speak Creole as their mother tongue. That was my interviews. I did them over Zoom as all of my participants were overseas. So then I got, from my data, I got some 3 major themes, and then I divided them into sub-themes. So the 3 major themes that I found was identity. And then the sub-themes that correlate are being born in Reunion Island, physical landscape, diversity, and speaking Creole. Then I had school life. The sub-themes that correlated are Eurocentric approach, French, sorry, I cannot see my French at school. And then in the languages, attitudes towards speaking French and attitudes towards learning foreign languages. Perfect. So I'm just gonna show you kind of a little snapshot of what my data looked like. So I analyzed some quotations from the song. For example, in relation to identity, dessus la terre sac moi l'aîné, which is on the land where I was born. And then I would analyze data collected from the participants against the quotations that I found in the song. So here I've just got some snapshots which show you kind of the general idea. some quotations. For example, I'm proud to have been born in Reunion Island. I'm proud that my daughter was born there. It makes us different. So I found that there was a sense of pride about the Reunionese identity. Then we've got La Case Micos Creole. That's at home, I speak Creole. So here from the song, we can see like in people's daily life at home, in their family, they spoke the Creole language. So enforcing that they had this Reunionese identity at home. Then participants said, culturally, we have our own music, which has its own history, but I think it has less of an impact on our identity as Reunionese than our language. So one of the participants really believed that Reunionese language is really at the heart of the Reunionese identity. So it's very interlinked with the Reunionese identity. And then we had like a comment about the appearance of Reunionese people. You can be blonde with blue eyes, black with brown eyes, blonde hair, afro hair, any hair. Sorry, I can't see that, but anyone can be Reunionese. You could be Reunionese. So she was talking to me because I'm like blonde. You kind of maybe have a preconception that this island in the Indian Ocean, you're going to be dark-skinned, dark hair, but because of the mix and the diversity of the population, you could look like anything and come from Reunion Island, and that's something that the participant felt proud of. So then we had the theme of school life, and this theme kind of showed that during their experiences at school, the participants felt like their Reunionese identity was not valued or taken into consideration. So in the song, firstly, it's highlighting that at home I speak Creole, but at school I speak French. So already there's like a divide between what you're doing at home and what you're doing at school. That one language has a place in one space and a language has a place in another space, but Creole is not allowed at school. Then a comment about like the westernization of the school. Basically, they don't give you rice, they give you only vegetables and meat, but our children don't eat like this. It isn't our culture, you know. So not even in the classroom, but even at lunchtime, even the whole system is very westernized and Eurocentric. Then we say there is no content about colonization. Colonization is a very important part of the history of Reunion Island. We wouldn't have such a diverse population if this hadn't happened. And also people want to be aware of their history, but this is ignored, and it's kind of ignoring a pinnacle part of the Reunionese identity and history. Again, we've got comment about the language. Le case m'école créole, l'école m'école français, dans mon chemin, mon langue étant époumaillée, which is meaning that the speaker is confused about what language to use and where, because at home they can speak Creole, at school they have to speak French, and in the street they're just confused, they're mixing everything up. And then one of my participants commented on this, and she says he is confused, and it's exactly that. We adapt because we don't have a choice, and at school you have to do everything in French, and it's violent. So this idea that the French is being imposed and it's producing maybe a negative feeling or emotion on these people that speak Creole at home, and then that's being kind of ripped away from them at school. And finally, under the theme of languages, we had some different attitudes towards language learning. The findings show that overall, being forced to learn French in Reunion Island had kind of negative connotation, but learning a foreign language like English had more positive a more positive kind of outlook for the participants. So we've got French as a kind of sophisticated language that only rich people could speak at home, showing that French has a privileged place in Reunion Islands. It's on a pedestal, and the Creole language was being marginalized. Then we have said, if your French is not good, it's like a kind of humiliation to speak French. So if you're not good enough at French, then people make you feel like you're not worthy, which again shows us that there's negative consequences to imposing this language. Also, then the last two quotes are about learning English. We've got, if I want to survive, if I want to make my life, I have to have it. So there's this needs of like this sense that you need English to survive in the world. And finally, it's a language that I'm grateful to have learned. So we also have a positive attitude because people feel like the participant felt like English would open up a wider world of communication, work, and travel to them. So those are my short overview of my findings and discussions. And in my conclusion, I decided, what I wrote was that what I found was that the lack of Creole language in the school did not make the participants feel any less Reunionese, but it did have some negative consequences for them in terms of feeling marginalized. Also, I didn't go completely deeply into my findings, but also for getting work and getting into university, this did have negative consequences for some of the participants. Also, the participants are proud to be Reunionese. So therefore, it didn't really impact their identity as a Reunionese person, but it generated negative emotion that the Creole language was not recognized in the curriculum. So they still felt 100% Reunionese, but they had some negative emotions around the fact that they weren't allowed to be Reunionese at school. So I argue that the one policy fits all, so imposing one dominant language in a school setting is not appropriate, and that there should be more diverse, more attention paid to diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds to give value to all identities, because it's very negative when people are marginalized for their linguistic or their cultural identity, especially in the school setting, when we should be learning to become more confident individuals. So the participants stated that learning only through the medium of French hindered learning and comprehension of some students, and not all students were exposed to French out with the classroom. So if they were only speaking Creole at home and then suddenly in a French speaking environment, this could become confusing and mean they can't keep up with their schoolwork. So I argue that home languages should not be banned from the classroom, and equal importance should be given to the linguistic repertoires of the students. And basically that is my research. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll be really happy to take any questions if you are curious about anything that I mentioned today.
Thank you, Annina. That was really good. And I think somebody had a question in the chat during your presentation when you showed the video. Somebody asked, can you, yeah, I think you can speak the language. Can you sing the song too?
Oh, can I sing the song? Sometimes I will sing the song at home, yes, but I don't feel, I mean, we could all sing it together if you want to have a sing song.
Actually, that was very interesting, and I actually have some questions, because one way or another, these elements of sociolinguistics and pedagogy, they are more or less unavoidable in my own research. So some of the things you said are very interesting for me. And the first thing that I wanted to ask you was about the you know, your research was focusing, as in the title that we see here, on the curriculum that was being taught in the 90s. So
Yeah.
my question now is, has there been any change in this 30-year period?
Yeah, there has been some changes. So some schools have tried to introduce a Creole module. So if you want to learn Creole, you can at school, because it's true that there's been a lot of immigration, especially from mainland France. And some of those people feel in order to integrate into the culture, they need to learn Creole. And there also been university courses that are done in Creole now. However, it's been kind of seen as tokenistic, because it's not as if the two languages have the same status. So it's not like they still have the same value. It's only if you decide that you're interested, you get to do it.
Right.
But there have been some changes, and yeah, in the school system.
That's great. And indeed, you were mentioning, this is actually something which is very relevant to my own work, which when you were talking about, you know, your conclusions, and you said that equal importance should be given to the linguistic repertoires of the students. You know, again, as you said, there's been a module being introduced, but you say that's not enough. That can be seen as tokenistic. And my question is, is it possible that the problem is there's definitely problems at the ideological level, which you have described so far? Could it be the problem is also pragmatic, in the sense that, as I understand by what you said, that a lot of teachers, they are not from Reunion Island, they are from abroad.
Yeah.
And so if the teachers are from abroad, how can this be, you know, how can this goal be accomplished? Or maybe that's the problem, should that be changed?
Well, yeah, you are completely right. A lot of the teachers actually come from mainland France, because they have amazing opportunity to work in Reunion Island. But I think that if you are going to come to another, well, firstly, I think that the teachers that come from there, they don't view Reunion Island as a different culture or country, because it's part of France. So I think that these teachers need to be educated about the culture and the language, and maybe have a basic Creole before they start teaching. Because, for example, in primary school, if the child has just started going to school, and they only speak Creole at home, it can be quite unsettling for them to then have to go straight into French. So if we could provide some sort of training for the teachers to have a basic understanding of the Creole language that they could use in classroom if needed.
All right. All right. Is there, yeah, I see Nadia is asking in the chat, is there anybody else who would like to ask a few more questions? I actually have something else I wanted to inquire, but I don't want to monopolize everything.
Okay.
Then I'm going to ask one last question. In the meantime, giving other people time to think about if they want to know, if they want to ask something else. So you mentioned quite rightly, you were talking about linguistic imperialism, and you also mentioned this connection with the cultural element. The cultural element. And yeah, I saw some examples in, well, actually one example in the extracts that you provided on the slides. But my question is, we were talking about food as an example. I was like,
yeah,
what were there any other examples of these, you know, these, let's say, these cultural insensitivity, let's call it,
so we have a food, also maybe Reunion Island is, as I said, is a very diverse place, and there's loads of
Right.
religions in Reunion Island. So they all like live together kind of harmoniously. They have Tamil temples, they have mosques and Muslim population. They've got also a Christian population. So I think that the school system doesn't take into account maybe that different people from different religion, they maybe need some time off on certain periods of the year, whereas at the moment it's Eurocentric, so it's just the standard summer holiday and things. But like, what about Ramadan? What about those students? Should that not be like incorporated into the curriculum? These people need to have time off to be able to practice their culture. That's one of the examples I can think of.
Right. And that emerged during the interviews as well.
In the interviews, they talked about like different religion, so that there's many different religions within the island, and that's what makes it like special, diverse, because people are able to live together harmoniously. There's not really any aggravation between any of the religions. So if we could translate that into the curriculum too, then that would be something amazing.
All right, I understand. Thank you very much. And yeah, I see nobody has asked any questions, but I really had a lot to say
Hello,
about
Paulo.
it. Oh,
Can
hello,
I ask
Azir.
question?
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
Okay, thank you, Paulo.
No
Thank you
worries.
for the presentations, Annina. It
Thank
was a
you.
very great presentations. And I've just, frankly speaking, I've just realized that there is an island called Reunion near Madagascar Island. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I was wondering, why do you choose this song, Mosa Mali, if I'm mistaken? What's the name of the author or the singer?
Usa Nusaba. Let me
Oh,
just
Usa
get back
Nusaba.
to the clip for you so you can see it.
Yeah, when I first listened to this song, it was great, and I hope you can also sing it too. But it turns that you didn't sing,
Sorry, I didn't say
but
it.
it's okay. And I mean, is there any other songs that also incorporate Creole, which was famous at that time too?
Yeah,
Mhm.
there's a lot of music that incorporate Creole. So they also have a style of music called Maloya. And this is a very interesting, I'll just type it in the chat for you. This is a very interesting style of music that was developed actually from slavery. They use these drums, these beats, these rhythms to keep going. And if you listen to the lyrics, they describe the situation at that time. So actually Maloya was suppressed and it was not allowed to be played until the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. So then it's very, very popular now. And if you should listen to it if you're interested. It's very, very cool.
Maloya.
Maloya.
And yeah, and you chose this song instead of Maloya. Perhaps any like reason behind it or not? Or it's
Because
just
this song was specifically commenting about linguistic use, and it gave us a really good snapshot into what was happening specifically in the 90s, which is the period that I was interested in because of the high school curriculum in place at that time. They have loads of other songs. Feel free to explore.
Okay. And then in relation to your conclusions too, when you also suggest the inclusions of home languages in teaching foreign languages, in some extent, we see that the use of monolingual, like for example, we only teach English and then English only policy in the classroom is not really good. But if we incorporate like too many languages in the classroom, it can also be quite complicated. Perhaps you have like suggestions on the percentage and how many percent should we use like the language you are teaching and then the mother language of the students or other languages too, because sometimes I'm confused too on how to incorporate other home languages in teaching language.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I was like interested in this as well, like how can we actually incorporate people's home languages? And I came across a term called translanguaging. And it's when you use give value to the students' complete linguistic repertoire in the classroom. So that means that they can use other languages or their home languages to enhance their learning. So if they need to explain something in their home language to a partner, they can do that. Or there's loads of activities that you can do. For example, get them to bring in a poem in their own home language and then explain to us what it means in English, or to find a metaphor in their home language and compare it and see if the metaphor in English is similar. Things like this. I don't know exactly what percentage of time you could spend on these activities, but incorporating some activities like this gives the students a sense of value about their identity as someone who speaks another language. There is a translanguage website that was created by Sally, who works at the University of Glasgow. I can't remember offhand what it is, but if you type it in, I'm sure you can find something.
Okay. And sometimes when I learned about translanguaging, it's also confused with what we call it as code mixing and code switching, something like that. Because in the theory of this code or switching mixing, there's also like incorporating or changing the language and then the use of other language or home languages to teach the target language, for example. What makes them really different? Actually, I cannot see the big difference in these two theories.
To be honest, I haven't researched enough into code switching and code what now?
Mixing or code
So
switching, code mixing.
I couldn't give you an answer to that, unfortunately.
Okay.
Well, if I can come in, well, translanguage is not the main part of my field either, but it is something I have to relate with. And the way I see it, code mixing and code switching are part of translanguaging. Basically, the best way I could explain it to you is that code mixing and code switching are the things that you actually do, and translanguaging is more about, the attitude, is more about the pedagogy itself, if that makes sense to you. It's like saying one is a method and the other is a methodology. I might be wrong. I'm not an expert in translanguaging, but this is how I see it personally. Translanguaging is not just about using code mixing and code switching, but using them with a purpose. Like, understanding why you're doing that and for a specific goal. I hope that's helpful to you.
Okay, thank you, Paulo.
No worries. And do you have any other questions for Annina?
That's enough, I think. That's wonderful answers too from Annina. Thank you.
Annina, there is one last question in the chat, actually. What were the attitudes of your participants towards your study?
Well, I think that my participants, I know that my participants, they were very excited and happy to speak about their culture and their language and be able to share their feeling and their attitude about that. So they were all very excited to participate in the study and have their voice heard and to talk about their culture, to talk about their language. Maybe they hadn't had the opportunity to do in this kind of context before. So yeah, they're all very willing.
All right. Yeah, this was very insightful, Annina.
Thanks.
I do not think we have any more questions, so I guess we can conclude here. Before we say goodbye, I just want to mention once again that we are looking for new members, new coordinators in our ELINET series. So if you would like to join as coordinators, just reach out to us. And in terms of members, if you come across people who are, they're interested in linguistics and pedagogy in general, but specifically EMI, global Englishes, things like the ones we discussed today, translanguaging, identity, linguistic imperialism, then please address them towards our network. We would be really grateful about it. And yeah, thank you again, Annina. It was very interesting. And yeah, if anybody else would like to conduct a seminar like this, just let us know about any topic related to linguistics or pedagogy. And yeah, our next seminar will be in 9 days, if I'm not mistaken, on the 22nd of June. It will be about global Englishes. We actually have Dr. Fan Fong from the area of global Englishes, a pretty important researcher, and I'm really looking forward, as it's my topic, to the next seminar. But apart from that, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Annina, for the excellent presentation, and we will see you next time.
Thank you
you
so
for
much.
attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Annina. Thank you, Paulo.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.